Hello and welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm Guillaume, your host, and each week I'm fortunate to share with you stories from climate tech founders, investors, and corporations sharing their unique insights into this fast-moving industry. Eventually, like me, you will learn, discover, and get inspired by those unique men and women who are contributing to the fight against climate change, and I hope it will help you to take a step in this formidable movement. So before we start, I just want to share a few words about us, as this podcast is just the tip of the iceberg of what we do at Startup Basecamp to support the climate tech movement. Our mission is to accelerate capital deployment towards climate tech founders, allowing them to focus on scaling their solutions. How do we do that? Every day, we help founders access to resources and connection and gain the visibility they need to expand their growth. We do this in a number of ways with a membership platform, a Slack group with a growing number of founders, investors, and experts from around the world. And recently, we went one step further with the matching services to connect founders with top climate tech investors. Keep in mind that we are able to do all of this thanks to the support of our listeners and our members. So please like and subscribe, share one episode with a friend, join a community, and if you haven't already done so, make a small donation to support our work. It really means the world to us. And now, enjoy the show! Hi everyone, in today's episode we are zooming into MapMortar, a trailblazer in the real estate sector. With commercial buildings accounting for around 40% of the global carbon footprint, the push for sustainable makeover is critical. MapMortar tackles this challenge with its virtual modeling and simulation platforms, making decarbonization retrofits viable and also profitable. Ranjeet, a chartered engineer, shares his journey from working on groundbreaking solar thermal power technology in India to spearheading sustainable transformations in the building sector. Inspired by a legacy of family involvement in real estate and a series of innovative ventures, Ranjit's approach to MapMortar combines its engineering acumen with a deep commitment to fighting climate change. Join us in this episode as we explore the complex landscape of building retrofits, discussing the technical challenges, market opportunities, and regulatory frameworks that shape the industry. Ranjit will share insights into how MapMortar's technology is advancing the movement towards zero-carbon commercial buildings and what the future holds for sustainable urban development. The second part of the episode, Ranjit shares his strategies for navigating fundraising challenges and maintaining resiliency during stepbacks. He also reveals how prioritizing family time and structured breaks from work help him achieve a sustainable work-life balance. Ranjit, welcome to the show. Hi, Ranjit. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm super happy to have you here with us today. I believe it's going to be a great opportunity to hear your story and learn more about this exciting adventure with Mortar.io, which is on the mission to make net zero building simple, fast, and profitable with your virtual modeling and simulation platform to make decarbonization retrofit, I would say, more accurate and cost effective. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Really nice to be here, and thanks for inviting me for this podcast. I'm really excited. We've been discussing about this for such a long time, but finally it's here.
Finally, we're there. So that's the tradition on our show. If you could give us a 30-second introduction about Mortar.io.
Of course. So I'm Ranjit. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of the company. And at Mortar.io, we provide an ongoing service to commercial landlords to plan, manage, and execute decarbonization for their large commercial portfolios.
So let's start from the top. On this show, we like to understand who is the human behind the story, behind the company, behind the entrepreneur in itself. So maybe if you can, share a little bit about your personal story and background. I mean, what are you passionate about? What do you love to do besides building your company? I know it takes a lot of time in your life as of today. I mean, what makes you feel inspired or your best self? As I always ask, like, who's Ranjit?
Of course, no, thank you very much, Guillaume. So I'll give you a quick background about myself. So I was born in India, and I come from a family business which has been in real estate their entire life. So my family is all about real estate. Um, I trained as a mechanical engineer. So I graduated as a mechanical engineer, following which I was working with the government of India for about 4 years on the world's first of its kind solar thermal power technology plant. Uh, Worked on that project for about 4 years and managed to get a patent out of it by fighting for the patent for nearly 10 years. So it was a very long, arduous task, but nevertheless, really rewarding and something and a great experience of working with governments, right? So it was excellent. And then I worked with my father's company, so my family business, for about 2 years or so. And I was actually visiting UK and Europe with my family on a sort of a holiday in 2013. And then I came to London and I met a few people in sustainability. And I was really inspired that, oh, hey, there's a lot going on in the UK and there's a lot of stuff on sustainability that's happening. Something which I have been passionate since I was growing up, but also I studied a lot of sustainability during my education and also worked in sustainability. Funny story about this is actually that when I told my father first that, hey, I'm planning to go to the UK to study sustainability in buildings, he's like, what's that? And then I just explained to him, and he said, oh, I've been doing that for 30 years. So sustainability, in a way, is quite a buzzword. But then at that moment, I actually realized that sustainability for me was, of course, a passion, but there was a new name to it, something which I had been doing my entire life. I've been seeing my family do their entire life, right from, composting to reusing material. And this, I started realizing, oh, I've seen this happen in my childhood. Oh, this is sustainability. So I already know what it is. So it was very easy to just jump onto the boat and become really more knowledgeable and go in depth about sustainability through my education. Now, after moving to the UK in 2014, I did a master's degree at UCL, which was again focused on real estate sustainability. And then over the past sort of 10 years or so, I've worked with various tier one companies like Arup, Bureau Happold, where I was working on various projects, right from individual buildings all the way through to large portfolios. Some key examples would be I was one of the lead engineers on the retrofitting of Battersea Power Station, which is one of the most iconic buildings in London and probably also in the world. And everybody knows it from the Pink Floyd album, I suppose. So that's the cover that if you want to look up for it. But that was a really exciting project. Apple was my client at that time, so I worked on their retrofit project. And then another couple of good examples are the UCL portfolio as well. I did a lot of work on retrofitting their portfolio, and same with Imperial College as well. So that's about my sort of work and education. But me as a person, so whilst growing up, initially I used to be kind of a geek, but over sort of once I went beyond like my 10th grade, I think I realized that I don't like to just study. I like to really get into the depth of things and do more extracurriculars as well. So and luckily I used to play cricket since my childhood. Being Indian, it's a very natural thing to do, as you probably know. But basically, I used to play a lot of cricket, and I did the same in my university, in my college, everywhere. So that is one of my real passions is cricket. And there's a lot to talk about. When we go on to the fundraising topic, I'll tell you how cricket inspired me to um, think about fundraising. And it'll be, I mean, something that I'm really passionate about, and how that links to fundraising was super exciting. Other bits, I have a wife and a 4-year-old son, which takes up most of my time when I'm not working.
I
But
understand.
great. It's great. It's really great. And secondly, like I said, extracurriculars. So, when I was growing up, I was actually quite a shy person, or I thought I was a shy person. But then in about 2005, I really got into metal music. So like really heavy metal music. And when I was doing that, there was just a time when some of us friends were just jamming one day, and we had listened to this new band from Finland called Children of Bodom. And they had these like really screechy vocals and growling and all of that stuff. And that was like really interesting to me. And I just randomly tried it, and it worked out really well. So some of my friends and I got together and we formed a melodic death metal rock band, which was quite exciting. And I remember the first time I went on stage, I was literally shivering. I was like, oh my God, what is this? What am I going to do? And this friend of mine who introduced me to metal, he literally just pushed me onto stage in front of 5,000 people. This was in Pune. And I had to sing a full song by another very famous band in front of 5,000 people. But that literally destroyed any fear that I had about being self-conscious, being shy, or anything like that. And from since then, I just realized that, hey, you know what? I'm not afraid anymore. It's great. Like it's great to go out in the world and explore yourself and do what you want, you know? So that was a game-changing 2 or 3 years in between when I was doing a lot of metal music. So music really inspires me in general to do a lot of things. So right from when I'm really, down and tired, I listen to music, which makes me really much more calmer. When I need a rush, for example, when I go running, I listen to metal music because that's just, very exciting. I know some people will be like, oh, what is happening? But anyway, so that just gives you a quick background about myself in terms of my extracurriculars. And then thirdly, I've been a two-time founder. So in 2010, again, with my family, we came up with like a sort of internet TV for cars. Something very similar to Bloomberg TV, but Bloomberg TV wasn't there at that time. We made those units so that stock traders in Mumbai who would travel from outside the city into the city every morning could actually keep a live track of what's happening in the stock markets, and they wouldn't lose time all the way from getting from home and an hour and a half drive to the city to actually start trading. They could just trade online in the car, or at least keep a track of the market. And that time, if you remember, we used to use these things called internet dongles. We still use them, I guess, but internet wasn't as strong. So we sold quite a few units. Unfortunately, after maybe 2 or 3 years, we had to shut the company down because the company had financial issues. But it was a really good experience of starting something new. And I was barely like 20, 23, 24 years old at that time. And then after that, I also tried to start something called as Instagram for Food, which was basically in 2015, 2016 times. Unfortunately, it didn't work out because I think there was just not a good founder market fit. I had no understanding of social media or how social media markets work. Other and I did have a really good understanding of food. I really still cook well. That's one of my passions. So another way I just relax is by cooking a lot of food. I can make a mighty biryani, just so to let you know. The next time we meet, I can bring you some. But anyway, so
Definitely.
that probably gives you a brief background about who I am and what my roots are and what I'm trying to do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of those very interesting insight about your personality and your love for metal music. I think that's also something that I don't hear that many metal music fans on this show. So definitely super cool. So before we start going into details about Mortar, what we like to do on the show as well is kind of like take a little bit of a zoom out, trying to understand I would say the industry that you guys are, part of. So trying to put things back into perspective here, would like to understand and start with your understanding of this, existing role of the retrofitting in itself to decarbonize the commercial real estate with this lens and zoom on the UK markets with trying to get like this, challenges and opportunity that it can represent in the overall, fight against climate change. So, I think maybe to start off, if you, Ranjit, if you could share with us some data points regarding the overall contribution of commercial real estate in terms of like GHG emission today. What are the projection there, and where are we in terms of this all overall effort to try to decrease that contribution? I mean, why is it like such a pressing issue right now?
Of course. I'll quickly start from like a global perspective, but in the world there are about estimated 2.5 billion buildings. Out of those, about 30 million are anticipated to be in the UK. Now, in general, globally, 40% of the carbon footprint is related to the built environment, and that's no different in the UK. It's very, very similar. Now, if you this is overall real estate and overall buildings or built environment, but out of the 40%, non-domestic contributes to about 23% of the carbon footprint in the UK, which is quite significant, as you can imagine. Now, if you look at the numbers, around 70% of the buildings in the UK constructed before the year 2000 will need retrofitting for energy efficiency and decarbonization measures in order to meet climate targets of 2050 net zero. And this is a huge thing because you can imagine that we have in the UK buildings ranging from built in the 1800s all the way through to early 2000s. So it's a very it's a landscape where different buildings have been built at different times with different standards and different understanding of technology and science. And the biggest thing that is noticed everywhere is probably till early 2000s, or we didn't have so much digital technology. So all of these buildings that have been built before 2000 are more than likely to be built in a non-digital or non-digitally analyzed fashion, which is a huge challenge because that means people struggle to keep, manage, and maintain their data for all of these properties. And imagine the scale is just humongous. And to be honest, we're just talking about the UK. This is the same thing globally because technology was not as advanced as it was back in those days. And we really know from our own experience that since 2000s, the technology boom has just gone up significantly. Before that, it was just getting there. So, in that sense, these are the key problems where commercial real estate is going to contribute a lot. Now, change of use of buildings is also a big thing. So, as we know from COVID, lots of things changed post COVID where people started to work from home a lot more and start going less to the office. Although I think that's coming back up again. Like I can see lots of people going to the office maybe 2, 3 times a week, but still you can see it's not going to be fully utilized. That means there's another challenge that is, oh, there are so many commercial or office buildings that are there, but not many people are using it. And I can give you an example of one of our clients. Other than COVID impacts, they have seen about 25% vacancy rates in their commercial properties over the past 4 to 5 years, uh, which is quite which is quite disturbing in a way that these properties are just lying there, no one's using them, but they still consume some shape or form of energy, right? So, what is important to understand the other aspect is how do we adapt these existing buildings to the changing use such that they're not just vacant? It's not like, where people don't need buildings. People are always going to need buildings. So, how do we adapt? So, for example, lots of people are thinking about retrofitting from commercial real estate, changing it to residential properties, or they're changing it to like retail spaces. Although retail is also a bit of a tricky market, as you know, many businesses are going bust on the high street. But it's just getting an understanding that retrofitting is not just about energy efficiency and decarbonization. There's a very strong business case behind why you should retrofit buildings, for example, in the UK, which tends to naturally have a lot of old and historic buildings. Uh, but fortunately, as we see, there's a big trend moving towards more data availability. So, for example, at Mortar, we use things like Ordnance Survey, LiDAR data, many other sources. I mean, I can keep on naming them over time. And buildings are becoming smarter. There's IoT coming in. So there's a lot of potential to actually even capture data on buildings that was not existing till date, which is a huge change, and only technology is enabling this. So I'm feeling quite positive about all of this. But as you can see, the reason is commercial real estate is just one of the major contributors to climate change and carbon
Mhm.
emissions. So I would say that is why it's a pressing issue that we need to focus on.
And where are we in terms of like this transition? I mean, a lot of founders like you trying to tackle that humongous problems. Do you see like the change already operating, or still like
more the headlines type of things that it's I would say like a beautiful wish, but in fact the reality is like it's too slow today, and in fact we need to accelerate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I'll tell you what, this retrofitting thing, it's always been there, but retrofitting was done with the sole purpose of sort of repurposing a space to make it better and get more value. That still remains, but now there's an added element of making sure that it's energy efficient and it's decarbonized. So what we've seen from the decarbonization perspective is that currently the rate at which we are going, we need to, it's not enough. It's nowhere close to enough. According to the EU Commission, we have to retrofit 3 times faster than what we are retrofitting today to achieve our climate targets. So that's a huge jump, right? And that's going to have an impact on everything. So you're going to need more skills, you're going to need more technology, you're going to need more materials, you're going to need more people on ground to actually do the job. So it's quite a complicated ecosystem. You're going to need more money, of course. Who can forget that? So all of these things taken into consideration. There's a lot of challenges, but as we see, and I'm really happy to say that UK in a way is leading on that front, where retrofitting is given a lot of preference, and I think EU as well is on similar tracks. US is following up quite quickly on these things. Australia is doing really well. So if you look at the relatively advanced economies who have had most of their buildings that are predicted to be existing in 2050 already built, almost something like 80% of those buildings already built, are going in the right direction. And I think having technology which can actually support increasing that pace, like I said, from what it is today to 3 times more, is going to be absolutely crucial. But I think it is, as you say, it's a very tough thing to do. It's a great wish, but what we see is not just us as startups, but even big organizations are making a serious move towards retrofitting their properties. Because, like I said earlier, it's not just about meeting compliance, but it's also a business case where if you have a better, more sustainable property, you're likely to get higher rents, and the market value of your properties is also likely to be higher. Both these numbers on the rents, you can get about 20% premium, 20 to 30% premium, even of what I've seen. And on the value, you can go anywhere between 10 and 20% higher market value for your buildings if they're more sustainable.
Maybe taking a little zoom out there, like in terms of the different players in that market. I mean, you mentioned like the incentive and their motivation in a way to move towards this decarbonization and utilizing retrofitting, techniques in a way to and innovation to go to the decarbonization. But can you tell us a bit more about like how is the market organized? I mean, is it super fragmented? I mean, again, we're focusing on the commercial real estate here. I think let's say real estate is so large on its own that looking at that aspect in itself, like, do you see like major players taking move or like it's still in a way slow? I mean, tell us a bit more about like how is the market organized and what are the market forces that you see there that in a way can be, I would say, like a great door opener for companies and emerging solution like yours, or could be also maybe a barriers. Tell us a bit more about that.
Of course. So, as you rightly pointed out, Guillaume, real estate is incredibly fragmented. It doesn't matter whether it's housing or commercial or retail, all real estate is incredibly fragmented. Now, in terms of forces driving this transition to net zero, obviously government is a huge thing. Although, unfortunately, as we saw from a few months ago, the government on the housing side, they scrapped the scheme for the EPCs to be to a certain level over the next few years. That is probably more because of economic concerns. Nevertheless, a bit of a sort of disappointment in that sense. So government is a very, very strong force doing these things. And again, this is because achieving the net zero 2050 target is climate law for us. So the government has to meet it. Now, this is on the residential side that the laws were scrapped, but on the commercial real estate side, like I said earlier, one of our customers has specifically told us that I think they have something like they were basically trying to sell about 25% of their portfolio to invest in their existing portfolio and buy new assets and all of these kind of things. but the price that they expected to get on the market for these existing buildings that they were trying to sell was 30% lower than what they expected, which is a huge blow to any property owner, right? So when they drilled down into the depths of why that is the case, sustainability was coming up all the time, like one of the main reasons of why this is not happening. So if you see about the driving forces, of course, government is a huge driving force in terms of setting up regulations and doing all of these things. But let's say for a second that tomorrow, if they scrap regulations on commercial properties as well, commercial real estate still has a very important role to play in terms of not just decarbonization, but also for the economic good of the country, because they still pull in quite a lot of revenue. And there's a straight business case that if you actually improve your buildings, you're going to get more revenue, you're going to employ more people, you're going to create better communities, and you're obviously going to grow your own business because you'll have a higher market value. So I would talk about those two things mainly as the driving forces, that is the business and the regulations. And of course, linked to the regulations of fines that are coming up. For example, you can check, I mean, this is an American example, but local law 97 in the US, in New York, actually is going to be imposing fines for building over a certain range. And UK is no different, or EU is no different from that. There are going to be fines imposed on buildings. Now, the other question you talked about, or the other point you talked about, was fragmentation. So real estate has a variety of stakeholders, and these stakeholders range from landlords to governments to tenants, consultants, engineers, investors, products, suppliers, manufacturers, so many stakeholders. And unfortunately, the way real estate has been going, one, because of its non-digital nature, and also because of so many players being involved, it is just naturally very, very fragmented. So everybody works in their own silos. And that is also because, in a way, information sharing or information management in a non-digital format has been very, very prevalent. And it still is. Like many times I go to sites to visit my clients and I still see that there are these old, dusty 30-year-old files lying in the basement of those properties. Nobody's looked at them for years, but there is some really important information in those. So the fragmentation is not only because there are too many stakeholders, but in general the process was never managed properly back in the day. It was just like done for the sake of it, and nobody really thought that, oh, you know, to give you an example, buildings for us are no longer like just static assets which you just buy and keep them and they're just going to grow in value. We have realized, one of the insights from our business is that buildings should now be treated almost as products. The reason for this is products, like let's take this iPhone, it needs to keep evolving over time to meet new customer demands and new changes in the market. Similarly, buildings nowadays can't just be static assets. They need to be improved continuously. They need to be looked after. They need to be catered to the market demand in order to remain valuable. So that was not happening previously, but now this decarbonization drive, sustainability, business cases is making all of these stakeholders think, oh my God, I need to do something to this building. I need to do something to this portfolio. And that's where all of this fragmentation is coming up. So there are a number of startups, and in terms of lead players, I can tell you many landlords, many contractors, many tenants are trying to get all of their systems in place. A very good example is there are some energy management platforms which do a really good job of sort of bringing various energy related information together in one place, so the landlord and their other stakeholders can see that information in one place. So silos are starting to reduce. Again, it's a positive step, but there's a lot of work to do. I mean, it's such a big field. But yeah, I'm feeling quite positive about real estate. It's going in the right direction.
So double clicking a little bit on the retrofitting aspect for decarbonization. I mean, could you share maybe with our audience like a little bit of like few examples of like existing solutions in itself that are already being put in place, or techniques that are used to help and that are like I would say the main component, maybe the low hanging fruit that can help to efficiently and cost effectively, I would say, decarbonize a building through retrofitting. I mean, what are we talking about in terms of the retrofitting? You mentioned like changing the purpose and the use of the building from office space to residential space eventually, but in itself, when I look at a building from the outside, built, prior to 2000, as you were mentioning, Like, what are the things that it's important to do at first, and the things are very complicated to do eventually in terms of like retrofitting and towards like this goal of decarbonization in itself.
Of course. So what I'll do is I quickly talk about the key challenges that we've noticed in doing retrofits. But the obvious and the biggest challenge that we've talked about with everyone or every landlord, every stakeholder is money. People just struggle with bringing up that upfront capex to retrofit properties, especially when it's a large portfolio. I mean, large portfolio is another beast altogether. But even just to retrofit an individual building, when you say, hey, you need to put in, a few million or a few 100,000, people are like, oh, that's going to be hard. So that's definitely the biggest challenge that we see. Now, what you talked about, I mean, to be honest, yeah, financing is the biggest barrier for sure. There's just no question about it. And then data is the other barrier. Now, for the question of retrofitting buildings, there are several sort of solutions that are out there in the market. So there's obviously technology solutions similar to us, where we are focused on helping through technology to understanding what large portfolios can do to their properties in the most cost-effective manner, reducing capex, increasing value, all of those things. There are other solutions which are hardware-based solutions which are trying to improve buildings. In terms of green financing, in the UK, for example, you've seen an emergence of local climate bonds. If I remember correctly, I think it was piloted by West Berkshire and Warrington councils back in 2020. So Green Financing Institute also recently published a toolkit that could unlock about 3 billion for local councils to retrofit schools, council offices, and several other projects, right? Data, as we said, IoT companies are coming out left, right, and center, coming up with very innovative solutions. And then what we see big time is that cloud-based collaboration is growing quite a lot. So lots of companies are building cloud-based solutions where what we talked about silos earlier is trying to sort of get rid of them. So that is something that we see quite a lot. The other bit you asked about low-hanging fruits, it's really simple. When you look at, for example, a building that is being built new, we always say that we need to reduce the energy that the building will consume when it's built. So the approach that is taken for a new building is generally fabric first. So make your fabric or the building envelope as best or as energy efficient as possible, and then you put in systems just to cover the stuff that you cannot cover with passive design methods. Whereas if you look at retrofitting, you have to look at it the other way around. Because imagine, if you go into central London and you see all of these really nice old historic buildings, you can't just go and say, hey, I'm going to change that facade because it is inefficient. There are laws relating to the listed building regulations and several other things where you have to understand that changing buildings is not just an impact on the building itself, but on communities, how the place looks, how the city looks. So the approach that one should technically take for retrofitting buildings is ideally go systems first rather than fabrics first, because most of these buildings are going to have older systems. So older systems like boilers, chillers, it could be like ventilation issues, piping design. There's be so many sort of complicated systems to take care of. Old lighting, for example, so changing from these. So I would say lowest hanging fruit is definitely systems to do first, or simple things like changing from single glaze to double glazed windows. What is important to understand is when you're retrofitting buildings, if you Google low hanging fruit for retrofits, you're going to get a few of these things which I've said. But what is important to understand is every building has a different need, not just based on the physical condition of the building, but also the business condition. So, for example, if you have 50 buildings in your portfolio, and I tell you, hey, Kiam, go and replace all the windows, or go and change all the lights, and go and change all the boilers to heat pumps, you're not going to be able to do that for several reasons. Of course, there's engineering challenges, but imagine all your 50 buildings are, say, occupied with tenants. Are you going to drive them out? How are you going to sort of manage that process? So it's not just about getting the low-hanging fruit done based on what's available on the technology on the market side, but understanding that, hey, if I do this, then it's going to impact my tenants. So that probably is not a low-hanging fruit for this particular building. Being able to assess that and seeing the impact of what those measures are and when they should be taken is the whole game, where the optimization comes in. Where essentially say, hey, you know what? I really need to do something to this building. It's highly energy efficient, but I have a tenant who has signed a 10-year lease. I obviously cannot just go and touch the building and change it. Or, for example, I put in a boiler in this building 2 years ago, and now someone has told me, "Hey, go change it to a heat pump." But who's thinking about you've put in a boiler 2 years ago? Are you going to replace all the things you've done? Are you going to spend more capex? What is the impact of embodied carbon? So again, all of these things considering so many different parameters, and we haven't even talked about like the market demands for all of these things. So considering that there are variable parameters, my simple answer is low-hanging fruit for a building depends on optimizing and understanding each of these variable parameters, which will then tell you, oh, cool, for this building, these 5 things are low-hanging fruits, not just something you Google and get.
So to close this section and summarize a little bit, I mean, according to you, what would be like then the major blocking and roadblocks that you see that is slowing down to reach this theoretical like goal of like 100% retrofit buildings? I mean, how long would it take? Like, I mean, and do you see any difference between the UK and the European market in general, or the US market? I mean, tell us a bit more like where are we at in that journey to summarize it.
Yeah. So, like I said, Guillaume, I mean, the biggest problem everybody, or the biggest roadblock everybody is trying to solve is financing of retrofits. It comes up every single time we speak to anyone. That is the challenge to solve. Like I said, there are many companies trying innovative solutions on that. We are also testing something on the financing side. There's many companies looking at hardware solutions, so kind of automating using robots to say do insulation, using robots to test various things on the building. So this is really some good innovation coming. The blockers, like I said, I think the biggest blocker is still money. Of course, technology and sort of gathering the data around these existing buildings, I would say, is the second biggest blocker. And then finally, third is the silos you talked about, where all of these different stakeholders are working in individual silos and there's a huge fragmentation. So someone that can solve that challenge of bringing these people together so that they work together is really going to accelerate this whole thing. So just to give you an sort of my perspective, the way we can accelerate these retrofits is by doing these three things immediately. One is finding innovative ways of financing retrofits. Two, being able to collect and manage data more efficiently. And three, bringing all stakeholders together seamlessly. These three would be the key to drive this. We are seeing quite a lot of that in the UK and Europe, even in the US. One thing I really like about the US is they're coming up with some seriously strict laws. Like I said, Local 97 is excellent, and this is being replicated in California, in Boston, in Seattle, I think. So in many places in the US, this is being done. So I would say that is the main thing. Is we are heading. I'll say all of these countries are heading in the right direction, but these three key problems, financing, data, and collaboration, are the ones that are going to accelerate the entire pace.
Thank you so much. Super, very interesting. All of those insight on. So now maybe let's go deeper into Mortar. I mean, what and you already unveiled that a little bit, but if you could summarize a little bit like the story behind it. I mean, which kept you guys identified initially that led to the current version of Mortar. I mean, in a way, why did Mortar have to exist?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a very shocking statistic, Guillaume. In order to retrofit existing buildings, we have to spend $1.3 trillion every single year for the next 27 years. I'm just talking about to reach 2050, right? Can you imagine? Like, that is just an insane amount of capital. And in this case, we're also thinking the same thing, like thinking about heat pumps, solar panels, super efficient lighting, all of these things that we always talk about. And all of this has to be done whilst navigating budgets, regulation, market realities, tenant demands, all of these complications. And what we realize is, as a company, that this $1 trillion shift in financial capital will fail unless there's unless there's an equivalent shift in the digital infrastructure for real estate. Like I've already said earlier, data is a huge problem. So the digital infrastructure is still lacking. So as a company, how we came to this conclusion or how we came to this problem was that when I was working in my previous job as a real estate consultant and generally been working across real estate for these 15, 17 years, To give you an example, there's a large college campus in London that I was looking after, and we were planning their decarbonization strategy. At that point, what we were doing is we were sending out some sort of requests to the client saying, "Hey, can you send us this information about these, these hundreds of buildings that you have?" And they would send us some like PDFs or Excel files, or like really unformatted, unstructured data and information about these properties. And then we as consultants would use that to make several assumptions. If I'm not wrong, for the earliest analysis, we used about 50 to 100 assumptions per building, which could be really a finger in the air assumption because there's not much information available, right? And then the way we generally did it was, let's say you have 100 buildings, we would take 5% of that as typical sample size, identify those 5 buildings with the client, and do an analysis on those buildings with these assumptions that we've done. Now, so what the problem there is, one, you're taking only a sample set of typical representative buildings, and buildings for me are like, you have to think of buildings as pants. Like you and I can't wear the same pant because we have a different size and a body shape. Similarly, buildings are the same thing. You can't just take certain aspects of a building and just say, hey, this is also applicable to the other building. In some cases, yes, but it's still different. So what we used to do is take these sample sets, apply them to these 5 buildings, and we did an analysis on the energy performance, the carbon performance, the costs required, the retrofit measures, all of these complicated things, mainly using Excel sheets and assumptions. So you can imagine the uncertainty at every step is growing. First, we are making assumptions. Second, we are doing sample sets. Third, we are using Excel sheets. So not really understanding the real shape and form, like the physical aspects of the building. You can't do that on an Excel sheet. Now, that unfortunately leads to a very, very high financial uncertainty when you think about this early, like CFO level planning, where you say, hey, the CFO is going to take a decision on retrofitting the portfolio. And I'm telling him, hey, you've got to spend £500 million on retrofitting your portfolio. But the problem is the uncertainty I'm going to give you on financial spending is 50%. So I'm technically telling him, you have to spend between 250 to 750 million pounds to retrofit their portfolio, which is just crazy. No one will be able to understand that bandwidth and say, oh, that's a great idea to retrofit our portfolio. They'll be like, later on, we don't have the money. We can't understand how much we can spend. So that's where I started, because I used to do these things all the time. I started realizing that there's a serious problem in the industry, which is seriously slowing down the whole aspect of retrofits, is just not having the proper understanding of what buildings are doing. And then in 2022, that's enough. I've done enough of corporate work now. I want to like do something in climate tech, which is more impactful. I've always had an entrepreneurial bug, as I told you earlier, with a couple of other things that I've done in my past life, also coming from a family business background. So I just quit my job, went and joined a venture builder accelerator called Carbon 13. That is where I met Ruggiero, our CTO. And literally, the first day we met, we talked about what my background was, what his background was, what the problems we saw, and it clicked straight away. Like we didn't even have to think for a minute to think, oh, we have a problem, we have the right skills, we're going to solve it. That's it. It was as straightforward as that. So the core of the problem is not being able to understand real estate properly in order to take the right steps to make decarbonization financially secure and compliant with regulations at the same time and compliant with business requirements. So that's the core of the problem. That's how Mortar came about. And then over the past sort of year and a half that we've been going, we've dived deeper into working with a number of customers, right from some of the largest property management companies in the UK to some of the most well-known landlords in central London. We are working on about a portfolio of nearly 1.5 million square feet at the moment. And all of that has helped us to realize that the problem is, of course, the problem is that, but what we are doing now is diving deeper into those problems and understanding that, okay, what is the customer workflow? What do they really want from this? And that is really helping us. So in that sense, I would say Mortar is slowly and steadily redefining or reframing the problem as we work with the customers. And you talked about hardware, right, Guillaume? So one of the things that we have been thinking about, again, based on our customer discovery aspect, is we've been thinking of certain hardware to integrate along with our software. That is still work in process. But we are going on those lines where we realize that, hey, you can't just have a software solve all the problems for real estate. You've got to have something hard tech, something hardware, which will actually implement stuff on real estate, because real estate is a physical thing. Of course, softwares are important, but unless you actually do something about it, it's not going to change. So that's how the Mortar problem and ecosystem is evolving, if that makes sense.
So on the product side, if you could maybe walk us through as of today, I mean, how does it work? I'm a developer, I'm like a building owner, I have a portfolio of different assets. I mean, I need to find this way to retrofit and decarbonize my building. I mean, how does it work? How long does it take from start to finish? Which return can I expect in general? In which timeline? I mean, if you could help us to visualize a little bit like this whole process and understand your secret sauce.
Of course. So let's again take the example of 100 buildings, a typical portfolio, and a client we are working with in central London. So we estimate that to retrofit all of these 100 buildings to get to net zero, it's going to take them anywhere between 15 and 20 years. Now, there are various phases of this happening. So the first phase is they want to get rid of 50% of gas on their estate by 2030. Then I think 70% by 2035, and then all of the gas gone by 2040. So that's right now, it's like 16 years away where the gas goes away. But in the meantime, you have to understand we have to start electrifying those buildings, which also means looking at the infrastructure, all of these things. So like I said, there are lots of technical challenges, of course, but there are also then commercial challenges which we have to optimize as we go through the process. So in order to understand the process of how this works, for us, it's as simple as the landlord just providing the addresses of their properties and uploading them into our tool. And it could be as simple as, hey, my building number is this, and the street address is this. And what the tool does is almost like a funnel. It scouts the entire open source data. And what it does is it funnels down the relevant data to that specific GIS location and creates something called as a foundational data model for the building. So I'm sure you've heard of a concept called digital twin. What we are doing is twisting that concept on its head. Now, traditionally, or like in the truest sense of the word, digital twin means you have to incorporate or account for every single nut and bolt in a building. But for decarbonization, you don't really need that. You just need a digital twin fit for purpose of decarbonization. And that is exactly what we're building. But what we're saying, and again, based on our experiences, if we say to a landlord, hey, we're going to build you a digital twin, everybody's like, oh, no, hang on, it needs too much information. But what we realize is, one, you don't need too much information. Two, we can already give you a lot of information without the landlord actually having to give us a lot of information. We can just use a lot of open source data technology and, of course, artificial intelligence that we have on our platform to actually build these foundational models. What happens then is the moment they have entered an address, they start getting a real-time picture of what their properties are doing today in terms of energy performance, carbon, regulations, market demand, all of these kind of things. Now, the idea is that how in the real world we build a building brick by brick, similarly in the virtual world, we also build the building brick by brick. But we don't have that much time, do we? Because we have a lot of buildings to decarbonize. So what we say is, hey, listen, we're going to do the bulk of the work by giving you a very solid foundation of the building, a very solid skeleton of the building, which with as much data as possible already applied to that building. All you have to do is allow us to connect to your information service system, let the AI do its job, where it's going to scout hundreds and thousands of documents to find the information that is relevant to each of your building and then apply it to that specific building in your portfolio. Additionally, you can also do your own site visits. You can find your own data, as in the landlord can find their own data and input in the tool if it's required. The only thing that does it just makes our models more accurate in terms of understanding what the energy prediction is, what regulations are applicable, what you really need to do to your building. So essentially, we are saying start with something. It might be inaccurate, but we don't want accuracy to be the enemy of good, which is basically starting to take the step towards decarbonization, because no landlord is going to be able to decarbonize their portfolio in a day or in a year. It's going to take decades. And in order to manage this process, you need to have a foundation where everything can be managed, understood, looked after, tracked, in terms of decarbonizing. What this allows landlords to do essentially is they can not only plan what they do for the next 20 years, but because this is a virtual simulation model, it can allow them to update those models based on conditions that change every year, right? So today, let's say you've allotted £5 million every year to retrofit your portfolio for the next 20 years, and you realize that, oh, next year I'm not going to have £5 million to spend. I'm going to have only two. So whatever strategy you've planned for the next year, that can be easily updated to match your boundary condition, which is the 2 million, right? And then it'll tell you for the 2 million, the maximum impact you can have across your portfolio to get into to take the next step towards decarbonization is this. And then you go and implement those projects again through the tool itself. So what it's doing is it's continuously tracking, managing, and helping landlords to execute the whole process of decarbonization by helping them to accurately financially forecast and change their strategy over time for decades. So does that give you an idea of what we're trying to do?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's super interesting. I like to double click a little bit on the technical aspects of your model. I mean, you mentioned like this original mess of like data sets that you can find from paper to Excel sheet to PDF. Eventually, like data already collected by if the building is a bit more updated with some IoT devices that are there as well, then all the public data that are available, including like the maps and others. So how do you make sense to all of that mess, I would say, in terms of data? I mean, which forms works for you? How many sources are you able to connect today to your model? How accurate is that compared to the assumption? If you would like to, I mean, if you look at your accuracy as the 100% theoretical goal in itself, where would you consider as of today you are, and how confident are you to go in the next 6 to 12 months in terms of accuracy? Again, you mentioned accuracy is not the end goal. The idea is like you start from something today. Tell us a bit more about this all data sets, and then you mentioned machine learning and AI. It's a very busy word today, but what does it really do?
Absolutely.
A lot of questions.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'll try to answer them as much as possible in the same fashion. But so, like I said earlier, the first thing is Mortar will scout like literally the whole globe. And when you said how many data sources, I can't give you a number. It'll be thousands. What it is again, going back to the silos that we talked about earlier, all these data sources are also siloed. They're in different formats in different locations. So what the tool first does is it scouts all of these hundreds of thousands of data sources to create these foundational models. Now, obviously, they're not going to be accurate, but based on our first tests that we have ran for about 150 buildings, we were always at least 70% accurate based on just the address of the building. And how do we know that we are 70% accurate is because we have always fallen within certain benchmarks that are used in the UK and certain ranges. So never has it happened that we are outside the benchmark. We're always within the range of the benchmark with just the address. Now, the next step is the accuracy, like growing the accuracy even further. So, for example, if let's say the landlord allows our tool to connect to their energy portal, let's say an Octopus API or Ovo Energy or similar sort of energy portal, our tool has always shown to be more than 90% accurate because the calibration, there's a very specific proprietary secret sauce called calibration that we have within our technology, which allows us to, with just the energy bills, it allows us to improve that initial foundational model that we have built to the next stage, because now we exactly know how the building is consuming the energy. Rest is based on physics and machine learning. So that energy data is applied to the building, and the physics and machine learning does its job to say, hey, now my model is calibrated, so our building parameters have slightly changed, but these are more realistic parameters. That's the first step. The other bits of pieces which you asked, landlords, like you said, or even other stakeholders, they'll have data in various sources, IoT, PDFs, Excel files, Revit models, BIM models, all of these different things. So what our AI does is it basically pulls all of that data into like a data lake. And the AI then, through large language models and other applications, it reads that information on its own and structures that information again. So it's as simple as thinking it as a two-step process, or rather a three-step process. First, enter the address, get the best possible information as of today without providing any data. Second, connect your information server system to Mortar. Mortar's automatically going to do scouting of the data that you have, not on the open world, but your own data, and then arrange it in a very structured fashion and apply it to your portfolio. And then this third step is, by this time, by step 2, you've already reached like more than 80-90% accuracy about your buildings. The final step is where we get into execution mode, where we say, okay, I have a very good understanding of my buildings now. I want to take it to the next step where we're actually going to start executing these projects. That's where people like other consultants come in, where they say, okay, I'm going to do a site visit and find out a bit more about this building. So the moment they go to the site visit, they see the physical parameters of the building. They can just make minor changes to the initial information that is already gathered. Now I can tell you, Guillaume, just these first 2 steps are probably going to save landlords years. I'm not even kidding. It's going to save them years. And then the last step is just improving, like we said, we don't want accuracy to be the enemy of good. That last 10-20% is just that, where you're just saying, okay, I need more information in order to actually execute this project. So that's how we are covering the ecosystem with AI. The AI is absolutely foundational to what we are doing. But we're taking a physics and AI based approach with the proprietary algorithms which Ridger has built and obviously are being built in the process. What we think is, say, in the next 12 months or so, we are going to be in a position where all this traditional way of collecting data is going to be gone. It's all going to be where you just connect to Mortar and it's going to give you 80-90% accuracy of your buildings without literally having to do anything. And then the final 10% is obviously a part of the execution. So you'll obviously have to do it.
But can you tell us maybe a bit more about your competition today in the EU, US, and the rest of the world? I mean, why you guys are different or maybe better? I mean, how do you compare yourself to other solutions emerging or available on the market today?
Yeah. So there are a few startups doing this. I mean, and that's very obvious. It's a $300 billion opportunity. So in a way, for this market and to look at the real impact that one needs to create, it's just impossible that one company can do everything. You will need competition. So I feel in our space, competition is actually very good because one can learn from what the other is not doing and then accordingly create solutions that are more relevant to the market based on their experience with customers. So competition is obviously there, but the way we are different is we take a whole portfolio retrofit methodology rather than just focusing on energy performance upgrades. What we basically help you with is we basically focus not only on making properties compliant with carbon regulations, but also help them to secure higher rents and increase their market value, which is a very difficult thing to do. Be going just beyond energy performance. And then the third thing that we are doing is we are building a software which will not only do these initial steps of strategy planning, but just from literally very, very recently, we had a customer call with our current customer and they said, hey, we got a strategy, but what do we do after this? What do we do after we get the strategy? And what do we do after the regular updates to the forecasting are happening? How do we actually get that done? So then the next step is managing the actual projects that happen on the property. So an approach where the strategy is completed, but then the whole execution process is managed through the platform itself in the form of a marketplace is something that I don't think anyone else is doing right now. And then finally, like I said, something that has literally come in the past couple of weeks is us exploring a specific hardware solution to attack a very specific problem that most of the landlords are facing. But it is quite secret exactly what we are doing right now. But once the hardware comes out, hopefully in the next few months, and if we decide to go down that route, first of all, then you will obviously know more details about it.
So how are you planning to scale your operation? I mean, what are the next steps to achieve it? You mentioned now, like also starting to go further than just like the planification in itself, eventually the financing, eventually the marketplace. I mean, all of that takes time to be put in place. So tell us a bit more, like, I mean, what needs to happen for Mortar? What's next for you guys?
So At the moment, the way we are working is obviously we're working towards achieving a product market fit as soon as possible. That also means still continuing it with a lot of customer discovery, and we're very lucky on both aspects of fundraising. And we haven't talked about fundraising yet, but I'm sure we will. We've been lucky on fundraising and also on securing customers because we as a company have a very strong network with not only people in the UK but globally. So the way we are doing it right now is we are utilizing our networks as best as possible to start these paid pilot projects, essentially get the revenue going, and then we are forming very specific very sort of what do you say, very specific planned partnerships with some of the largest names in the industry. Again, I unfortunately cannot reveal those names, but they're everywhere. Basically, one of those names, they're everywhere. Where that is helping us to take a one-to-many approach, so we don't have to go running after a number of landlords for us to actually start sort of selling and scaling a solution. But through our product development partners and commercial partners, we can approach many, many more landlords. So the scaling is much easier with a one-to-many approach rather than a one-to-one approach. So that's the first step that we are taking right now. That partnership is already in place, and we're super excited about it. It's one of the most well-known names in the UK, one of the biggest names in the UK. And the next step for us in terms of taking it further is, like I said, I think just continuing customer discovery, that is the core of all of these things. It's just working as closely as possible with the customer to understand in more depth what their problems are and trying to find solutions. The other bits, obviously, typical gear, like we will obviously have a sales team and all of these things working towards growing sales and achieving revenues for the next round and all of these things. Those are really like typically standard things that we will do nevertheless. But the core thing that we are focusing on is key partnerships and a one-to-many approach.
So finally, to close this section, can you tell us a bit more about like your business model? You mentioned like paid customers. What is the projection that you have as a company?
Projection in terms of
In
revenue?
terms of revenue and the business opportunity, I would say there in itself. So maybe first your business model, and then what are the financial projections that you guys have, if you can share?
Yeah, so I can definitely share the business model. Financial projections can give you a hint, but I don't think I'm supposed to say the exact numbers. And then that's not because I don't want to say it. It's just because we have to be careful of how much information we divulge at which point, especially that we've just signed up new customers and we are signing up even more now. So in terms of how our business model works is we basically have an initial setup fee for the software, which is a pretty standard fee. And then based on the portfolio of the landlord, we charge them based on the sort of size of their portfolio. Essentially, think about it like a setup fee plus a SaaS subscription model, which is dependent on how big their portfolio is. Does that give you an idea?
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I think it's always interesting for investors and founders listening to the show to understand like how a company is looking to go towards profitability and creating a real business, but also what is the model that works and that you guys are discovering. I mean, you guys are still early stage as well, so all of that will evolve along the years. But knowing what is the unicorn pathway that your guys are on is always something that people are looking for.
I can give you a quick hint on that actually. So when we sort of end of last year, we had a slightly different business model. We were still charging based on the portfolio, but we realized that there needs to be a slight change in the business model, and this was actually prompted by one of our clients, and they said, "Hey, listen, doing this is kind of like just it doesn't seem to work. Try doing this." And then the moment we changed our business model to that, one is our financial projections have improved a lot. They will be a lot more in line with what's required for, say, a seed round, and how much more runway we can get. So that kind of, when I say seed round, that hopefully should give you a hint of what kind of financial projections we are looking at in terms of growing the business over the next year or so. Of course, as any company's ambition is, we want to get to close to 100 million revenue probably in the next 5 to 6 years. That's a recurring revenue target. So we do set ourselves ambitious goals, but at the same time, we are also focusing on the impact that we create because we know that as a company, we don't want just a company to be a valuation. We want to bring in value because having grown up in a business background, I know that valuation is less important than the value that you actually bring. Because the moment you bring value, your valuation is going to go up. There's just no question about it. So that's the approach we're taking. And in terms of sort of just understanding the business model again, we changed it quite significantly from what we were doing late last year to this new approach based on what customers have told us. So we had a certain way of thinking about a business model. The customers came and said, "Hey, don't worry about this. This is not going to work. One, it doesn't give us value, and two, you are also losing out on value." I mean, customers are so good sometimes because they just want to get the best value possible, and they are willing to pay for value, right? That again, the point of value of valuation. So they will pay more money if you are giving them real value, and they will want you to get more money for the value that you deliver because they know that is what is going to drive even a better product and even a better solution. So we did change our business model recently, but to simply put, it's a setup fee plus a SaaS subscription model based on an annual contract.
All right, so that's a common question for every guest on my show. What's your personal opinion on the climate crisis? I mean, what would you tell to people who feel, scared, demoralized by all the already visible consequences of climate change? I mean, are we doomed?
Well, hopefully not. We are here to stop that doom as climate tech founders. But yeah, I mean, again, there's no question about it. It is a serious problem. There are skeptics out there who are trying to sort of say things against climate change, but every single data, every single research, big organizations like NASA and everybody else that you can name up, we have like real visible physical proof of the climate change impacting things. I have seen it go wrong. I mean, I can tell you, I'm from the city called Pune in India. Back in the day, Pune, of course, it has grown a lot. I mean, it used to be like a smallish city compared to India. Now it's an 8 million people city. But I know the difference. When I was growing up, the temperatures in Pune would never, almost never go above like 32, 35 degrees at best. These days, in summer, they're going to 40, 45, which is unheard of. And it's just ridiculous. Like that's just one example of how climate is changing. We obviously saw many wildfires. Look at San Francisco or California. Look at Australia. We've seen so many different islands being flooded, coastal islands especially. UK is it's a very high risk of damage with climate change. So I think we are on a bad track, but the awareness amongst people is growing seriously about all of these things. And I'm very happy to see that founders like us, people with a purpose-driven impact, so people who obviously want to do business like us, but with a very specific purpose that is to fight climate change, is amazing. I mean, in my opinion, every single one of us on the planet should be doing something to support fighting climate change. Like literally every single one. To be honest, maybe people could just quit their jobs and do something in climate change, and that's going to save our planet. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, I think the whole point is we're not doomed yet. We are on the path to doom. But if we keep on doing what we are doing, and if we keep on fighting with resilience, I don't think there's anything that humans cannot do to change the whole climate change situation. I mean, look at we got it from being one of the most peaceful planets and the only planet supporting life to a planet which is about to see its doom in the coming few centuries. So if we can do that, we can do the other way around as well. I'm pretty confident about that.
How can our listeners, founders, investors, experts listening to the show can help you today?
Sorry, say that again?
How can the listeners of the show can help you today? So founders, investors, and experts.
Okay. So, like I said earlier, we are currently looking for more and more pilot projects. So we would love for people who have any connections in real estate to introduce us to say 3 commercial portfolios or 3 university portfolios to actually see our progress in action. That would be the best thing for us to do is to actually work on some live projects if possible. Secondly, we are nearly at the end of our fundraise. We have about 10% left in our round. We have secured the remaining 90%. So if any investors, angels, we're mainly looking at angels at the moment because we have a very small amount left in our round. Would love to get some support on that if someone is interested. And with founders, I mean, I'm always so humbled by founders working in the climate tech space and how helpful everyone is. So whether it's from my side, if I can help founders to understand a bit more about their journey as a founder or as a climate tech founder, I would be more than happy. And the same I would request other founders is if you want to talk about climate change, if you want to collaborate on climate change, I'm open to literally anything and everything, because the only way we can solve this crisis, the one, Guillaume, you think we are headed towards doom, we're not, is by actually working together with other climate tech founders. So that would be the main thing. And, whenever we talk about fundraising, I'll tell you other bits which can possibly help other founders as well.
Thank you so much, Ranjeet, for your time, incredible insights, all this hard work that you are doing to decarbonize this massive real estate industry. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. I really appreciate your time, and it was super enjoyable. And please do let people who listen to this podcast know that they can come and reach out to me on LinkedIn anytime.
Thanks again for joining us on the Tech for Climate podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned next week for more climate tech insights. In the meantime, head on over to our webpage at startupbasecamp.org, where we have lots more insights and resources for anyone wanting to get involved in climate tech. If you find our resources useful, please consider donating to support our small self-funded team. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends, and see you next time.